almost canceled that date 3 times before leaving the house. The first time was in the morning, when I looked at my calendar and realized I had agreed to meet someone on a Thursday, which is an objectively suspicious day for a first date. Thursdays are for being tired, for pretending you'll sleep early, for negotiating with yourself about responsibilities, not for meeting strangers from the internet. The second time was when I opened our chat. He had confirmed the time, sent a smiley face, and added, "Looking forward to it." That sentence shouldn't feel heavy, but somehow it did. Maybe it was the way he always responded quickly, like someone who had too much availability. Or maybe it was my mood. The third time was when I stood in front of my closet, holding 2 different shirts and wondering why I was putting effort into something I wasn't fully convinced about. You know that feeling when your intuition doesn't scream? It just taps your shoulder politely? Mine was tapping. Maybe not today, it suggested. But I had already said yes 2 days earlier. And I have this inconvenient habit of honoring commitments even when my enthusiasm expires. "It's just coffee," I told myself. 40 minutes. You've survived worse. That logic has betrayed many women before me. Still, I got ready. Nothing dramatic, nothing glamorous, just presentable enough to look like I had my life together, which, statistically, is always an approximation. The cafe he chose was neutral. Public. Well-lit. The kind of place people recommend for safe first dates. That reassured me a little. I even checked his profile again. Normal pictures, normal bio, no red flags, at least not visible ones. And that's the tricky part about red flags. They rarely introduce themselves early. On the way there, my mind started its usual commentary. Maybe he's nice, maybe it's a good surprise, maybe I'm overthinking, or maybe, I thought quietly, I'm not. I arrived 5 minutes early because being late on a first date feels like starting with an apology. I stepped inside, scanned the room, and spotted him immediately. He was already there, sitting straight, phone on the table, looking around like he was monitoring something. Not smiling, just observing. I told myself that was normal. People look around in cafes. But when he saw me, he stood up quickly. Too quickly, like he had been waiting for confirmation. "Hi," he said. And his voice was friendly, but his eyes looked alert. Not warm, not relaxed, alert. That's when the small tap on my intuition turned into a quiet knock. Nothing dramatic, nothing dangerous, just a subtle feeling that said, "Pay attention." And unfortunately, my intuition has a very good track record. Still, I smiled, because politeness is a reflex. We ordered coffee, we sat down, and for the first 2 minutes, everything sounded perfectly normal. Which sometimes is exactly how strange things begin. He started with the basics, where I worked, what I liked to do on weekends, if I lived alone. That last question landed a little differently, not wrong, just early. "I have roommates," I lied, not because I do, but because my intuition had quietly stood up from the table and said, "We're improvising now." "Oh," he said, nodding. "Nice." Then he smiled, like he was relieved. That should have been the first moment I fully trusted my instincts. But I didn't want to be dramatic. I didn't want to turn into the person who thinks everything is a threat. I didn't want to ruin a date just because my body was reacting to a feeling. So I did what most people do when something feels off. I minimized it. I told myself he was nervous, or socially awkward, or just too direct. He kept talking, not about himself exactly, more like about situations, like he was setting up an environment. "I like women who are mature," he said, "not childish, not entitled, you know?" I smiled politely. "Sure," I said. "And generous," he added. That word again. Generous. I took a sip of coffee and nodded like this was normal conversation. "What do you mean by generous?" I asked lightly, trying to make it sound casual. He laughed softly. "Not like money," he said quickly, like he had rehearsed the answer. "Just energy, support, kindness, loyalty." Loyalty. Another heavy word for Minute 8. He leaned back and studied me for a second. "You seem like someone who doesn't panic," he said. I blinked. "What makes you say that?" He shrugged. "Your face. You're calm. That's rare." It didn't feel like a compliment. It felt like an evaluation. I smiled anyway, because my body, unfortunately, has been trained to smile during discomfort. He asked if I wanted something else. I said no. Then he said something that should have been harmless but wasn't. "I almost didn't make it today." "Oh?" I said. He sighed dramatically. "My card got blocked. It's been a mess." There it was. The story. Not a romantic story. Not a funny story. A problem story. I nodded slowly. "That sounds stressful," I said, neutral. "Safe." He watched my reaction, like he was checking for something. "It's crazy," he continued. "They freeze everything and you're just stuck. But I'm handling it." "Good," I said. Then he smiled again. "You're very understanding." I didn't like how quickly he said that, like he had heard it before. Like he was used to getting that response. He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not asking for anything," he said, too soon, too defensive. I hadn't accused him of anything. My heart did that annoying thing where it speeds up without permission. I took another sip of coffee, buying time. "Of course," I said politely. He continued, as if he was building a bridge. "It's just embarrassing," he said. "Normally, I'm the one who helps people. There's a certain sentence structure that always makes me tense. Normally, Usually, I'm not like this. It's the setup for sympathy." He glanced at my phone on the table. "You're not texting anyone, right?" he asked, smiling. It was said like a joke, but his eyes didn't joke. "No," I answered. "Why?" He waved a hand like it was nothing. "I just hate when people are distracted," he said. "Feels disrespectful." It was the first moment I felt the date shift. Not in content, in control. He was controlling the tone, the expectations, the emotional space. I suddenly became aware of the chair, the table, how close he was sitting. The cafe was still public, still bright, still normal. But my body was acting like it wasn't. I tried to change the subject. "So," I said, forcing a lighter tone, "what do you do for work?" He smiled like that question amused him. "A little of everything," he said. That answer is always suspicious. "Oh," I replied. "Like freelance?" He leaned in. "Let's just say I know how money works," he said. He said it with confidence, like he expected me to be impressed. I wasn't. I was tense. He kept talking, and somehow the conversation kept circling back to the same themes. People taking advantage of him. How he hates disrespect. How he values loyalty. How he's had bad luck lately. How a good woman makes a difference. It was like he wasn't talking to me as a person. He was talking to me as a role. And the worst part? He was doing it calmly. No aggression, no obvious threats, just a steady pressure like a hand on your shoulder guiding you where you didn't agree to go. I started planning my exit in my head. Option 1, bathroom excuse. Option 2, fake call. Option 3, just say I need to go. But then he said something that made my stomach drop just a little. "You live far from here?" he asked. I froze for half a second, not because the question was crazy, because the timing was. "Not too far," I said carefully. "Do you drive?" he added. I smiled. "Sometimes," I lied again. He nodded slowly like he was cataloging information. Then he looked at my cup, at the table, at my hands. "You're quiet now," he said. "I'm just listening," I replied. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're smart," he said. "I can tell you're calculating." That sentence was too accurate. And suddenly I realized he wasn't clueless. He wasn't awkward. He was watching me watch him. That's when I made a decision. Not dramatic, not loud, just clear. I needed a polite exit. And I needed it soon. Because if my intuition is this awake, It's usually because it already knows something my brain hasn't fully admitted yet. And then, right at that moment, a waiter approached the table, and the expression on his face was different, like he had noticed something too. The waiter didn't look directly at me at first. He looked at the table, at my date, then at my untouched coffee. That tiny sequence told me he was reading the situation. "Is everything okay here?" he asked politely. My date answered before I could. "Yeah, we're fine," he said quickly with a practiced smile. The waiter nodded, but then he turned to me, just for half a second, and asked, "Miss, did you drop something near the counter earlier?" I blinked. "No," I said. He tilted his head slightly, like he might be mistaken. "Oh, I thought it might be yours. A small item." A small item. The way he said it didn't sound like a question. It sounded like an option. My brain caught up. "Oh," I said softly. "Maybe it is. I can check." I stood up calmly. Not rushed, not panicked, just grateful for the excuse. My date looked mildly confused but didn't protest. "I'll be right back," I said. He nodded. "Sure." I walked toward the counter. And that's when I noticed someone standing nearby, pretending to look at the dessert display. He glanced at me for a fraction of a second. Not staring, not intrusive, just aware. The waiter approached me quietly. "You don't have to go back if you're uncomfortable," he said under his breath. "We can close your tab here." That sentence relaxed something in my chest. "I'd like that," I replied quietly. Then the man near the counter spoke, not to interrupt, just to add normalcy. "I think she was sitting near my table earlier," he said casually. "Maybe that's what you saw?" The waiter nodded like it made sense. Normal conversation. Normal tone, but I understood what was happening. They were giving me an exit without making a scene. I paid quickly. My hands were steady now. That's the funny thing about decisions. Once they're made, the body calms down. As I turned to leave, the man from the dessert counter stepped aside to let me pass. "Bad date?" he asked quietly, not curious, just gentle. I hesitated. "Just not the right one," I answered. He nodded like he'd heard that before. "They rarely start that tense if they're good," he said. That was a surprisingly accurate observation. I glanced back once. My date was still at the table, checking his phone, not looking worried, just waiting. Which told me something important. This wasn't new to him. I stepped outside. The evening air felt cooler than before. Relief does that. It sharpens the senses. A few seconds later, the cafe door opened again. Footsteps. I turned slightly, ready to keep walking. It was the same man from the counter. He wasn't following me. He was just leaving too. Timing, nothing more. "At least you trusted your instincts," he said lightly. I gave a small smile. "I almost didn't." "But you did," he replied. And somehow that felt like the first normal sentence of the night. He stopped a comfortable distance away. Not too close, not performing concern, just present. "That happens more often than people admit," he said. "Bad dates with good profiles." I exhaled a small laugh. "That should be a category on apps," I replied. "Looks normal, feels suspicious." He smiled. "Accurate." There was a quiet second where most people would say goodbye, but neither of us seemed rushed. "You handled it calmly," he added. "I handled it politely," I corrected. Calm came later. "That's still handling it." I leaned against the railing near the cafe window. "I kept thinking I was overreacting," I admitted. "It's strange how we negotiate against our own intuition." "That's because we don't want to be unfair," he said. "And sometimes we confuse politeness with obligation." That sentence landed. "You're good at phrasing things," I said. "I've had practice watching friends on bad dates," he replied. "You start recognizing patterns." "Like what?" He counted lightly on his fingers. "Too personal too fast. Victim stories early on. Testing boundaries disguised as jokes." I laughed softly. You just described my last 40 minutes. Then your intuition is working, he said. We stood there for a moment, people passing, cars moving, life continuing normally. It felt grounding. I almost canceled tonight, I said. Twice. Why didn't you? I didn't want to become the person who always cancels. He nodded. That's fair, but showing up doesn't mean staying. That was another good sentence. You collect those? I asked. Only the useful ones. I noticed then how calm he was. No rush, no trying, no subtle positioning to extend the conversation, just natural presence. That, ironically, is rare. What about you? I asked. Why were you there alone? He shrugged lightly. Meeting a friend who got delayed. I was just killing time with coffee and people watching. People watching? It tells you a lot about human behavior. That sounds analytical. It's observational, he corrected. Less judgment, more pattern recognition. That's a safe way to put it. He smiled. You're smiling more now, he observed. I'm not in an evaluation anymore, I said. That helps. It really did. The tension from earlier had faded, replaced by something quieter. Not excitement, not romance, just ease. And ease is underrated. We stood there a little longer than strangers usually do. Not awkwardly, just unhurried. Well, he said after a moment, at least your night improved. That's true, I admitted. It started tense and ended educational. Educational is a polite word for stressful, he said. I like polite words, I replied. He smiled. There was another pause, the kind where conversations naturally end. But before it did, he added casually, if you ever want a normal coffee with no psychological analysis involved, I'm very capable of boring conversation. I laughed. That's a strong offer after tonight. It's a realistic one. I considered it for a second. Not romantically, not dramatically, just honestly. A normal coffee sounds nice, I said. Good, he nodded. Then tonight can just be the pilot episode. That's optimistic. That's practical. We exchanged first names. No long planning, no overpromising, no movie-style moment. Just a simple, maybe next week. And somehow, that felt enough. On my way home, I thought about how close I came to canceling. How intuition rarely shouts. It nudges. And how not every bad date is a mistake. Some are just detours. I still believe in canceling plans when you need rest. But I believe this too now. Showing up doesn't mean staying. And leaving doesn't mean losing. Sometimes it just makes space for the right conversation to find you. And sometimes the good part of the story isn't the date you planned. It's the one life quietly rewrites